Hello.
How are you?
I'm better by the moment.
Oh, Katie Pie. I'm okay.
Good. Very excited to be part of this project.
I'm good.
Very well, thank you.
Is this fly going to drive you crazy?
Hopefully not.
As long as it doesn't sit on my head like Mike Pence's fly. My name is Barbara Nodwell. I was born in 1940, and so that makes me 80 at this point.
My name is Beverly Finlay and I am 72.
My name is Robert, age 72.
I'm Jane Patterson and I'm 70 years old.
My name is Kurt Van, that's in Swedish. In English it's Warren, of course, and I'm 81 years old.
My name is Gillian, usually known as Jill, again, Warren.
I was born in St Heliers at home, and I lived in St Heliers all my life until I got married. So I'm really in Auckland through and through.
Whangarei till I was about 17, but I went off to boarding school when I was 12, shipped down to Auckland. Yeah.
How was that?
Terrible, I'm still recovering from it. It was wonderful growing up in Whangarei. We were in a sort of a semi-rural setting, just out of town, and had a lovely big garden, a lot of native bush, a river flowing past our boundary, and then we had a beach house up in the Bay of Islands, which is only an hour away, and it was a wonderful childhood, and yeah, it was a great childhood.
So I was actually born in Bishop Stortford, but I grew up in Saffron Walden, which is a little town in North Essex in England, up on the chalk hills of the North Essex countryside. Very agricultural, though the town I was brought up in is a market town, a very ancient market town. So we didn't have a car until I was something like 11, so we walked everywhere. And walking through those streets, and on market day there would be all the animals, and looking out of my bedroom window when I was little in the end of summer, watching the stubble being burnt off on the hills surrounding the town. All sorts of things about the place. It's actually very deep in me.
Yeah, I was born in Stockholm. Well, until I was 24 I worked in Stockholm. I left Sweden and came to New Zealand in 1965. We left, yeah, we arrived here in 1966.
No, we arrived here in 65.
Oh, 65 was it?
Kurt was bringing his mother out to New Zealand, and he left Southampton at the end of 64, and I had been working as a nanny in Scotland, and I was returning to my family who were living in Australia at that stage, but the ship came via New Zealand, and I had a grandmother and uncle living here then.
I've lived for a little while in Wellington and was glad to come back to Auckland. I was married to a pilot at one point, so we did a couple of postings, one in LA, which was an interesting experience. Long enough to have to shop like a housewife shops, and it was great. Again, it was good to come home.
We grew up in a well, what I do remember is that it was a very small apartment. It was 40 square meters. It was very cramped, of course, you know, compared to when we later came to New Zealand. And but it was home.
Well, I moved around a lot as a child. I was born in Edinburgh, stayed there till I was 5, moved to Yorkshire. From Yorkshire we moved to Surrey, closer to London. Then we moved back to Edinburgh, and then when I was 13 my family moved to Australia. 4 years. I went to school there, finished schooling. Then I went back to Scotland because I was filling in time, because I was going to do some training like you back in Edinburgh rather than in Australia.
I was born in Wairoa, Hawke's Bay on the 29th of May 1949. My siblings and parents. My brother Peter was 3 years younger than myself. My father Vern Atzett My mother, Kate Enola Jones, and she was known as Nola. She didn't like the Māori name Keita. The house that I lived in, it was a very old, cold, even with 2 fireplaces. There were no windows in the lounge because the bedrooms all and veranda came onto it all. And one day Mum decided she wanted a window, a big window. So she got Dad's saw and cut one. Dad put in a window.
My father was a lawyer, and he used to work very hard, and he was a bit distant, always at work. And the only time we really connected at a deeper level was up in the Bay of Islands when we went fishing together.
My mother was German, and she'd actually been a refugee as a child at the beginning of the Second World War, because her father spoke out with a group of his friends very strongly against the Nazis, and so they had to leave Germany. And she grew up in Palestine, in Jerusalem and Ramallah, speaking German at home, English at school and Arabic on the street. An incredibly creative, crafty sort of person. That's what her passion was. She taught primary school students in a little village near where we lived. She was always doing things for other people. Organised support for refugees in Germany at that time, it was still needed. She raised money for homeless, all sorts of things. She was always baking or making things for bring and buy sales or whatever it was to raise money.
Yeah, I have one sister and she's 2 years older than I.
And I grew up as an only child because I had an elder brother, but he died before he turned 4. I was, but I've got no memories whatsoever.
I don't think my mum and dad totally saw eye to eye, really. My dad was away an awful lot, and my mum was really left bringing us up. You know, I do remember that. Oh, he was an entrepreneur. He did his own thing. Yeah, Mum really brought us up. I think it probably made me respect women, yeah, more. Mum took care of everything. She was very capable, actually, a very capable woman.
And my father died suddenly playing squash when I was 15, and I was away at boarding school. And he had his first game of squash and died of a brain hemorrhage on the squash court. So that was a big shock. My mother, about 2 years later, moved back to Auckland, where she'd come from, and remarried. It was awful, yeah, especially being away at school like that, and the shock of it. Oh, well, that was awful. I just remember I was lying in bed in the dormitories, age 15, probably 9 o'clock at night. The door opened of our dormitory, and in comes the housemaster saying he wants to see me down in his study. I've got some sad news for you. Your father's just had a terrible incident playing squash, and I'm afraid he's dead. The next minute I'm taken down to the headmaster's study, and I then have to pack a bag, and then my brother and some family friends come out from the city, and we drive back to Whangarei that night. But the worst thing about it, that whole thing, was being sent back to school so soon after the funeral. About 3 days later, just sent off back to boarding school with no support there. Absolutely no support. You just had to toughen up and get over it, you know.
I think I was extraordinarily lucky because my parents were the best people I've ever known, and I grew up in an incredibly happy household. And I was part of a generation that was born during the war, or some people born just after the war, and I think people took an enormous interest in making sure our lives were happy. It was a wonderful time to grow up post-war, even with the shortages and things like that.
She and my father were Quakers, so I was brought up a Quaker. Quakers are a branch of Christianity where there are no priests, that everybody is equal. everybody can equally talk to God and can receive guidance from God or Christ or whoever. Thinking about that from my parents' point of view, absolute pacifists, because if everybody is equal, you can't go off and kill people. And during the Second World War, my father, who was 12 years older than my mother, had left England and worked in Lebanon as a teacher. But during the school holidays, he went and worked for the Friends Ambulance Unit, like the Red Cross, on battlefields and things. And he never spoke about that. So I don't know anything about it more than he did it. But his pacifism was absolutely deep. One of the most terrible things he did from his point of view was he once smacked my younger brother when he was being extremely irritating. And the person who suffered most was my father, to the extent that I really remember that.
It was the headmaster. He wanted to see me after the funeral, and he said, how did it go? You didn't cry, did you, at the funeral? I remember those words.
Well, my parents, I think, I was not a spoilt child, but the fact that they'd lost one child, I was probably pretty special to them. I don't think they were strict disciplinarians, but what Dad said went, put it that way.
The one of pure joy, I think I still remember when my dad came out with a kite he had made for me, and I didn't know what it was, and so he showed me how to fly a kite. I think this is why I quite enjoy going to the kindergarten, making kites.
I think my earliest memory was when my dad was in the Air Force and came home on leave, and I can remember sitting on his knee in front of the fire and him telling us stories about two fictional characters that from the Air Force called Jock and John, and he always started out the story with chocks away, and I used to think, why do they have chocks? I mean, what do chocolates have to do with Air Force? But as a very small child, you know, you accept all these things your parents tell you.
Well, it's probably just being outside the apartment, the block of apartment where we lived. Yeah, just being there, really. Yeah, outside this block of apartment, yeah. I do remember that, yeah.
I struggle with this because a few years ago, a good many years ago now, we did a course called Forum. And it was a complete blank, and then one or two thoughts came, and one that still sticks in my mind is I must have started school and I was allowed to catch the bus home, and my father for some reason was waiting at the bus stop so that I would get off, and the bus didn't stop, and I was taken on to the next one, and I can still remember the what do I do now? I don't remember what happened.
I think probably was being hit by a sunset. I think I could probably just walk, so however old that was. My mother was round the corner talking probably to her best friend in West Road, and I must have toddled round the corner to go and see her. And as I went round the corner, I went from the darkness of South Road into the brilliant red sunset right in my face of West Road, and it absolutely hit me like a shock.
I was looking at that question, and it's hard, but I do remember coming down to Auckland to see my grandparents before the harbour bridge was built, and we came on a car ferry across the harbour. So that's one going to their place in Epsom. I can feel the ferry ride across the harbour, and I can see the garden in Epsom, the trees, and I can see there was a special tree with berries on it, and I can still see those berries, yeah.
Now, going down to school, oh, this was a hoot. We had one bike between us, and I got it for my birthday, and my mother had hid it in that Coomera box. I didn't know I had a bike. I never looked at the Coomeras. And we used to wait till we saw the bus coming about a mile away and hop on that bike. I'd pedal, my brother would be on the seat. Well, one day I hit the post of the culvert, We both went flying. But we ran and we caught the bus.
One of the happiest things that I can remember from my childhood was the day we went and got a puppy that we'd all wanted for so long. And I think it peed all the way home in the car. It was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. It was a collie pup. It looked just like Lassie from Lassie Come Home. It was a beautiful dog.
Well, one memory that comes back to me again and again is they were cutting the grass outside the block of apartments. And I remember, piling all the grass clippings up and sitting there. And I just wandered off. And I think I was flying, actually. Yeah, I was totally away. That comes back to me quite often, actually.
I don't know that I have one. I feel we moved around so much. I'd just start a new school, make new friends, and then we seem to 2 years later be on the move again. That there's nothing that sort of jumps out at me. I do remember the house in Yorkshire. It was an old house and it was stone, and I can remember the children that lived behind me and beside me and just being involved with them. Maybe it stood me in good stead in that I now find it easier to go into a different situation because I've done it so many times.
I think it would be the fishing with my father, going out in the boat and when the sun rising and being way out way out deep in sea and catching fish, and just that time together. It would be one of the favourite ones.
I was neither rebellious and I certainly didn't get straight A's. When I was naughty, I did it very quietly because I went to the school where my father was a senior teacher, which is a handicap. So I wasn't always good, but I was quiet about my naughtiness. I really liked being different, so I would dress differently and be outrageous in that sort of way, but in a very quiet, unassuming way. I was increasingly not a good student. I've read a theory more recently that says that people who are born at the end of summer and so are very young in their class, that they do not do as well academically as you would think that they might. And I think I was one of those. I was always the youngest in the class, and even though I was very bright academically, I couldn't be bothered. Revising for exams I didn't do, hardly. I read children's books instead. And so I passed all my exams, but I didn't pass them very well. And I was absolutely sure I was not going to go to university, so I don't have a degree. I'm the teacher in the high school here who does not have a degree.
I was an only daughter in our family, so I could hardly do any wrong. And I'm sad to say I've always been a conformist. I probably didn't put a foot out of line, and my folks just did everything to make my childhood happy. And teenage years were dances and stiff petticoats and rock and roll, and it makes me laugh today because the younger generation discovers this wonderful music that we'd already discovered.
Teen years were difficult because of this this death of my father, but I became rebellious because of the arrival of the Beatles. I think I got involved with rock music, and at school we were wearing pointed shoes and trying to grow our hair long, and getting up and singing Beatles songs at school shows, to the horror of the masters there. They couldn't understand what we were doing. And I remember in our house music, we sang a song, "We've Got to Get Out of This Place" by the Animals as one of our songs. So rebellious in terms of getting involved with music and rock music. Yeah.
No, I think my teenage years, were not very happy, probably because my parents, there was always this argy-bargy going on. I was always quite small in stature, not particularly interested in sport. No, I'm, you know, my teenage years were not my happiest years, put it that way. Probably as I grew up, I think when we got married, I figured out, well, this is life. This is what it's all about, sort of thing, you know. And having a family, it gave me kind of direction. And I do remember working, because I worked out of Sweden quite a bit, and those were good years, you know, when I was early 20s. That's when I probably found myself, actually.
Whereas mine were in Australia, I never felt I was Australian. I was always the oddity. Age 13, I don't think is the best age to move to a completely different country. I don't think I was a rebellious teenager at all. Life was simpler then too. There wasn't the focus on having the right clothes. We all made our own. Yes, there were parties further down the track, but they were all very moderate in comparison to the parties of today, I think.
I was a tomboy, very much a tomboy, and my parents then decided to send me away to boarding school. My last year, after our exams, a few seniors and I went for a walk up to Whararangi home, where the Hohepa home is, the children's home. And I stopped outside the Steiner Hohepa home and I said, I'm going to work there, not knowing a thing about it. So I went back and talked to the nuns. Yeah, I was taught by nuns. They arranged for me to go in my uniform and I was interviewed by a Dr. Maria Glass. So that's when I had my first job in curative education. School was a school for handicapped children and dysfunctional children. So I became a house mother, looking after about 4-year-old children. You know, you put them on the pot and you come back and they're spitting it. And I took the opportunity to help in the kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher I found out was the grandmother of one of the kindergarten teachers here at Michael Park School. I was there for 3 years. I married an Australian who worked in the same curative home. The following year I returned home to Wairoa, where my eldest daughter was born. I divorced him, by the way.
Really?
Yes.
Why
Yeah.
did you divorce him?
He played around, he was silly with money, couldn't save, you name it. That was it. So I divorced him.
So I met Peter at the School for Intellectually Disabled Students, because the young people used to hang out in the evening, and that's when I met him. I suppose that he was interesting, that we could have interesting conversations. He's the only person I've ever fallen in love with, so there was the physical side as well, but I needed both, you know, also interesting person as well.
I was married to a pilot at one point. I was an air hostess, and yeah, and a uniform attracted a uniform, I think.
I met her on a blind date. A friend of mine said you should meet this friend of my girlfriend. So we went off to a ball in the city somewhere, and she was from Hastings, came from a legal family and from a provincial town, and so we had very similar backgrounds.
At a party. I was invited to a friend's party and he was there, and that's how we met. We sort of, and then we discovered he knew my friend who worked at the home where I was getting married to his best friend. So I was the bridesmaid at their wedding and he was the best man at their wedding. So that's really how we met. Destiny? I don't know. Maybe it was. Anyway, we're still together after 45 years.
Oh, on a cruise ship.
No, I was all of 18, so I had to carry on and go back to Australia. And Kurt In those days, the easiest way to get into New Zealand was to emigrate, so he couldn't just leave, just like that. But a few phone calls and the odd letter. I said, well, I'll come to New Zealand for Easter, and my father rose up and said, you're not going to New Zealand. So Kurt turned around and said, well, I'll come to Australia.
So I have 2 children. I have a son, Beran, who was born when I was 23, and a daughter, Lucy, when I was 25. It's an amazing experience. So neither of my children's births were easy, but I remember very clearly after Beran's birth, which was quite traumatic, thinking, I can't wait to do that again. I loved being the mother of babies, but then I've always enjoyed my kids most the age they are now. So when they were babies, I loved being the mother of babies. When they were toddlers, I loved being the mother of toddlers. When they were teenagers, I loved that. Now, they're 2 of my best friends, so, I just like my kids. I think one of the things about having babies that I really love is that when you see the world with new eyes. If you go for a walk in the forest with a newborn baby for the first time, you see everything as if it was new, just as much as they do, whatever they see, whatever a newborn baby sees. From that point of view, a magical experience.
I have 3 children, 2 boys and then a girl. Andrew, the oldest, and then Gus 14 months later, and then Tracy 5 years after that. Pretty well organised, I think, because it was quite busy with the 2 boys, and then 5 years later it was like having an only child again, but knowing what to do. And I have to say that she's my best friend to this day, so it all worked out beautifully. I don't know what I was expecting really when my family came along. For a while there it looked as though I might not have kids. Well, I lost a baby at 5 months, and they said at the time that might preclude me having any. So I suppose when they did turn up and then 2 more arrived after that, I just considered myself pretty lucky. I don't know whether I was a good mum or not. I think they think I was, so maybe that's the important bit. I was part of the generation that didn't have to work when they were growing up, so I think I was pretty lucky. I like the fact that women work these days and that women continue to work when they've got small children, but I do feel sad for those first few years when you perhaps, depending on what your circumstances are, you can't necessarily be home with them. I think that was a huge thing for us all, just to be able to be home. The thought of not having children was really difficult, and it's a strange phenomena, but when you desperately want to have children, all your friends seem to get pregnant, and everything involves other people's pregnancies, and it's quite hard to take at the time.
Amazing experience. We had them out here, and we grew up in this rural spot, and it was amazing, the highlight of my life, really, growing up with those 2 boys.
We are very proud of our children and what they've achieved. Our eldest daughter was brought up in Grace and Shirley in Christchurch, is now working in Australia, raising money for cancer kids. Our son is a chef, has his own restaurant, and my daughter has an accounting degree, just finished recently, capped, and is now studying her postgraduate. So I'm very proud of my children and what I've done.
How old were you when Rachel was born?
Oh,
26.
26, yeah, 26, yes. Oh, I was filled with wonderment and awe, I remember, when I first held little Rachel. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. Yeah, probably the biggest thing ever happened to me, really. You know, your own child.
first time round, you can't believe it's part of you, part of us. You know, suddenly holding this tiny little person that is so dependent upon you. I didn't have any parents or family to sort of say help to, so it was quite daunting, because obviously Kurt went back to work and I was left at home with one small baby, and then lo and behold there was another one on the way, and then there was a bit of a gap, and then we had number 3.
Life with my wife out here with my 2 boys. The time in that band when I was young, yeah.
Some of the happiest times we ever had were August holidays, because my folks were members of a tramping club. There was a hut on Mount Ruapehu, and every August holidays a whole bunch of these friends and their children, and we had 2 weeks in a mountain hut with no electricity. We made lifelong friends with those kids. It was just so exciting that the skis were handmade and the clothing we wore was home sewn. It was so far removed from what happens today at Mount Ruapehu, but I wouldn't have swapped it for anything.
Well, you said you were in awe when Rachel was born.
Yes. But maybe that's what I will remember, holding little Rachel. Yeah.
I suppose one of mine is when we decided to get married. Kurt wasn't particularly interested in getting married. Why didn't you want to get married? Because of your background?
Well, that certainly came into it, because marriage to me didn't seem a very successful way of being, you know, because my mum and dad, most of the time, they were at each other's, you know. But we made it work, dear. We made it work.
55 years later, yes. We're still working on it. It all took place underneath the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But I must have said, I don't think I can carry on like this, or words to that effect. And you just said, well, do you think we should get married? And I said, yes.
And we had known each other for how long then?
6 weeks on a ship and about a month in Australia.
Yeah.
It wasn't very long at all.
It will be something to do with plants, nature. I have a very clear image of my gateway to heaven. The gateway that I will go through to get to heaven. It's a garden gate, and it's got mosses and lichens and all sorts of things growing on it. And I'm on this side of it. This is what I see now, imagine now. I'm on this side of it, but one day that garden gate will open, and I have a glimpse of the garden beyond, which is a glorious place filled with light and beings, people that I can't really see yet. I'm not really expecting when I die to be looking backwards. I'm expecting to be looking forwards.
The saddest moments I had was when my cat died, and the death of my parents and my brother. I was about... My mother was very sick. Yeah, my mother got very sick. She had several breakdowns because there was a... my parents were wanting to sell to go in town, because my father had property in town from his father and grandmother. It was a tennis court, and they were going to build a house on it. They eventually did. And then our neighbours across the way did something that was just so wrong. They got a lawyer to say that they had paid for our property. They did not, and we had to take them. They went to court, and that's when my mum had a breakdown.
The death of my father at 15, and the death of my wife when she was 40, in 1993. She died from cancer after 18-month illness.
I mean, I suppose thinking of people who've died, but my mother died after a long illness, and I was glad when she died that she wasn't suffering anymore. And I only cried about losing her much later, not at the time of her death. And my father died, and he'd had a great life, and he finished everything he wanted to finish, and he was ready to go and join her. Some of my colleagues who've died very young, but because I don't think of life as an end, I don't think of them having lost anything. They've gained their next life. I've lost their friendship, so that's really sad for me. And when students die, or former students like Tim at the beginning of last year, I'm terribly sad for his family. But again, he's gone on to whatever he's doing now. Their life changes, or their experience of existence changes. But I don't think death is an end. And other things that have happened in my life which have been hard or difficult or painful or whatever, I mean, that's part of what life's about, and they're learning experiences, and you grow through them, and so they're some of the most valuable times in my life.
I think losing my parents. Dad went first at an early age. He was all of 63, and my mother died when she was 70, and I was 33. And I suddenly realised I had Kurt and my children. Coming to realise that, life doesn't go on forever.
My mum was not a very happy person, and she actually did commit suicide. And that knowledge about her having passed in that manner, if you like, was very sad.
Because we'd been there only about 4 months before.
Yeah.
And we didn't realise how depressed she was.
No.
That's easy. I think the saddest thing I've ever experienced was the loss of my mother. She was an incredibly vital person who was vital to the day of her death, and then she had an aneurysm, and she was, in a matter of hours, she had died. I was 41. Yeah, she was 68, but she had still so much to give, and she was so fond of us all, and she was just the pivot of our family, I think. I can remember they took her to Auckland Hospital, and I can remember rushing there with my brothers and sitting on the end of her bed and holding her foot, because it was the only part of her I could actually touch. Hearing nurses in the corridor outside talking about a party that they were planning to go to that night, and thinking, but how could you go to a party when the whole world is virtually ending? The one thing I remember thinking years later was that we were so anxious about caring for him. I don't think I took the time to grieve for myself. It took quite a long time, until years after she died, before I realised that I had to just come to terms with it just for me, not just camouflage it by looking after Dad or being company for him.
The support from friends and family was invaluable. Reaching out for that support, being vulnerable, trying to find some meaning in it, I suppose. That there's some lessons to learn from it, and some personal growth.
Words is not enough. Just being there and knowing that you're there and supporting is all you can do. To try and talk and give advice, I think it's almost pointless, because the person goes through whatever they're going through. Just being there for them.
I mean, who are we to give advice?
Yes.
I think Kurt's put it in a nutshell, just being there for them.
That was pretty tough. Luckily, just at the time Pip died, my business took off. She would have loved to have been around to spend all the money, I'm sure. So I was able to employ a housekeeper and a nanny for the boys. I was able to take my younger son with me when I travelled sometimes. There was a lot of overseas travel in my business. I had the financial ability to bring in support, and but it was I had to keep my business going, so I was away a lot. You're having to be one parent, and normally there's two of them there, and I think that was a real something the boys missed a lot, having that mother there, and all the hard decisions you have to make as a parent. You're doing it on your own the whole time, and I found that very, very difficult.
Well, I suppose my parents actually had an influence on me all their lives, and when they had died, it makes you think even more about how they did influence you. I think that both of them were the kind of people who always had their glass half full, and there was a lot of laughter and there was a lot of fun. And it took me a long time to realise that the most important word that I can think of in the English language is fun. And it seems to me that if you're with people and you have fun, everybody benefits from it. It seems a highly underrated little word, but and the other thing that my dad always said, and it's now my motto and it's my family's motto, is do it now, because procrastination, oh my gosh, it's such a bad thing in your life.
The only regret, I wish my brother was still alive. He committed suicide. His second partner, or his second wife, it was the daughter that made it very difficult. His partner's daughter made it very difficult for him, and he didn't know how to cope with it. He tried and tried, and he tried to do so many things. He lived on our farm. They had a nice house. He tried his best, but her children did not accept him as their stepfather, and the daughter made it hell for him, whatever he could to, and he just couldn't cope. He had enough on his plate with trying to make things work on the farm, and he was torn between wanting to see his own children and finding a new partner. I was phoned on the phone, yeah, which, it was a shock. It was a shock. So we came down from Auckland straight away, and of course his body had to be taken away. He was in the mortuary, and we rang the mortuary, and I said, I want to see my brother. And they said, yes, you can, providing you don't touch him. And they said that a constable would be there. So my husband and Ivan and I went to there, and we stood our distance. It was not a nice sight to see, and I did a karakia for him and spoke to him, and Ivan cried. Hard. A big thing, we had his burial, and we had him cremated. We took his ashes and spread it on the farm that my parents had. So we put him back where he belonged.
My son going to prison was an experience quite outside the realms of possibility as far as I was concerned. He was involved with drugs, which I didn't even know about. I think our whole family was completely speechless for a long time. But again, if you look for a positive in everything, it was an opportunity to learn about a side of life that we had never anticipated knowing anything about. And it was an opportunity to show him how important family solidarity is, because I doubt whether he'd have got through the experience without the family being there to support him. We did have some amazing experiences, and we met some extraordinarily kind people in the process. And Andrew wrote every single day. Andrew did his part in writing the funniest letters that made us, sometimes I'd sit on the step reading his letters and I'd laugh or I'd cry, or I'd laugh and cry. So that was a big shock and a huge experience in my book.
I don't think I have one big one. I just see life is unfolding and things have happened in the way they were meant to happen, and there's a series of little ones. Could have been a better father, more supportive to my wife, a better husband, not putting more time into being a musician.
To have left my marriage earlier, because I'd been married 30 years, and it's easy when you have been married that long to find excuses not to face up to reality or face up to the true feelings that you have. You think, I won't do anything now, wait till the 21st birthday is over, or I'll wait till I really need to look after my dad, or a million excuses. And I think that would be what I'd say, face up to it and do it now, really. I think that Bruce and I both had entirely different things we wanted out of life, and they weren't conducive to being married to one another. And strangely, when I realised that there was no fun in our relationship, it was the moment when I thought, I can't do this any longer. So that old word fun again. And I've been happy ever since. So how about that? And today I could honestly say that at 80 years of age, I don't think I've ever been happier in my whole life. So, I mean, if everybody was that lucky, it'd be a pretty good world we live in.
Just after she was born, my daughter was put in a cradle in the same room as me, and everybody else went away, and she started crying, and I couldn't get to her, and I didn't call anyone. And that feeling of being bereft, being betrayed, being abandoned is part of her life. But that is part of her life. If that hadn't happened, her life would be different. So how can I regret my part in that?
Yeah, what I would say, be your own person is probably the main thing. Don't try and be something because society kind of expects it of you. Just be yourself, because that will always show the world that you are in control. Because so many young people, I think today, they want to be this or that because that's how they perceive what is expected of them.
Be true to yourself. Don't compromise your principles. Be authentic. Don't worry too much about the future, because I think if you are authentically you for now and do the best you can for now, that's all you can do. If you do that, you can really live in the moment. That now is all the time we've got. The past's gone, the future, anything might happen. Now is what we've got. So if you're true to yourself for now, that is the best human being that you can be. And it'll be fine. Trust yourself. Enjoy it.
Try and find your true self and what you really want to do in life, rather than conforming to an idea. Try and dig down and find what you really want to do. Live with a lot of integrity. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable and open to to life.
Think before you leap. Whatever you do, do it well. If things go wrong, think about it. sleep on it and then deal with it.
Just having the family and, you know, being able to say that, you know, my kids seem happy, they're happily married, and yeah, that gives me a lot of satisfaction that we did it. Yeah.
It's quite awesome, actually, you know, that we've created this family and they all get on. There's never, oh, do we have to come again? And to sit there, I mean, Kurt, we had a gathering at Easter. Kurt, I said I felt for him because he misses out on all the banter and the quick fire chat. But he said, no, I can sit back and just enjoy all the interaction, seeing it happen. And you sort of think, yes, we created all this.
Yeah. Oh.
So I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not going to sniff.
I think my two sons, yeah, and how they've made it in life and doing well, and I certainly tried to provide for them and support them, and but they did miss that, didn't miss having a mother around, that's for sure. I think the death of my wife and the death of my father, these things, they turn you inwards a bit, and certainly after my wife died, I did get involved in Buddhist philosophy and teachings, and through this friend that lived nearby, and I suppose I started on a more of an inward journey, a spiritual journey. The value of meditation, trying to get in touch with your true essence, the value of spiritual groups. I went on some retreats, Buddhist retreats. I got involved with a Vietnamese teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh, got involved with his group. And the value of meditation after my wife died, that was very, very, very valuable in keeping things together.
We were perfect. I'll tell you one thing that, again, when I had little ones in prams and I walked with them, I didn't have a car, and you talked to them and pointed things out, or you sang songs, or you were just with them. Today it really saddens me to see a mum on the phone, and she might even have a cup of coffee in the other hand, pushing a buggy. And I sort of think, well, where's the interaction between you and your child? You know, those young years, they're only there for such a short space of time.
But I do think young people of today are more aware changes in society, and I think, yeah, there seems to be more. Well, I get the impression anyway that young people of today are almost, they're more aware of things could be better, you know. Whereas I think in our day, you know, we just want to make it better, and in that we strive for possibly more money or more this or more that, and so on and so on. But now I think people are aware, or young people are aware, that is not really what matters. It's like quality of life that matters.
I had a quote from Rudolf Steiner, describes the two sides of man or a human being as being the kind of a fight between Lucifer is the masculine power, the yang, and Ahriman is the female power, the yin.
Yes, absolutely. I know it as a teacher in a school, that when stuff happens, like when kids get it wrong and do terrible things and get into all sorts of trouble, that can be a moment when their life turns round. I know in my own life, you know, having cancer, when I was a young woman in my 30s, I was really ill. I had a slipped disc and I was chair-bound or bedridden for 12 months of my life and in great pain. one of the best times in my life. I learnt so much, you know. So absolutely, for me, my experience is that difficult times are times when you grow most. When life is easy and you're just in your comfort zone, well, you're just easy and you just stay there. And for me, life is about growing and changing and developing, and that's what it's about.
A catalyst for inward growth and inward, looking inwards, yeah.
What comes to mind is that regardless, you have to carry on. And I think that was really my take on it. Yeah, life goes on. You know.
But I think that society has changed too. I mean, I know that my parents never really came to grips with losing their little son. It wasn't talked about. It was, you know, stiff upper lip, just get on with it. I can remember as a teenager, there was always a photograph of Christopher, and I just asked my mother one day, I said, can you tell me about him? And she said, I still find it very hard, and she just broke down and said, I just find it so hard to talk about him, because we didn't. But she obviously learnt from it, because when my father was dying, she said to me, we will talk about Dad when he's no longer here, won't we? And I said, of course we will, he's part of our family. And she said, well, we never talked about Christopher. And she'd carried that all her, well, majority of her adult years.
You won't lie down.
It's a wake-up call. When you lose somebody, when they die, it's a wake-up call to the fact that you might have been leaning on them a bit hard and you've now got to stand on your own 2 feet. Or as when Andrew went to prison, you grow from an experience because, well, it's rather a sink or swim kind of thing. If you don't learn and grow from it, then what would happen? You would end up
yeah.
Evolution.
The older you get, the more you realise how unimportant your own life really is. It's just a grain of sand in the whole thing. But that if you get pleasure out of it, then you're lucky. And I've had heaps of pleasure. And if I died tomorrow, nobody need be sad, because when you've had 80 years to have a good go at it, then you've been fortunate, I reckon.
The meaning of life, I think, is that we've been put here to find out and improve. And improve, I mean, you know, is to do good for mankind, really.
Well, I think it's what I've said. I think the meaning of life is to be the best you can be, and to do that you have to keep on growing and learning. And I don't know whether I'm a teacher because I believe that, or whether I believe that because I'm a teacher, but I think the meaning of life is to do the best you possibly can do, to be authentically you at all times, in all situations. And if you want one simple word, it's to be kind. Kind to other people and kind to yourself.
I sort of, I see it as a journey of awakening, really. I think we are here and we're sort of through our lives, we're at all different speeds, waking up to our true selves and finding a spiritual path, everyone at different levels and different stages of their journey. But to me, it's a journey of awakening, I think.